I was originally planning to make a video about The Office, not the show itself, but why it only really works in English-speaking countries. Because let's be honest, there have been a ridiculous number of remakes, and every single one of them has had the same energy, confidence first, understanding later. And it never really worked, because the American version has a type of humor that doesn't translate. You can't subtle awkward silence, you can't dub cringe, and you definitely can't Control-C, Control-V Michael Scott into another language and expect him to survive. So I was ready. I had a full script, a structured argument, a very confident 14-minute explanation on why the show should never work anywhere else except here, and maybe here. And then Amazon released La Oficina, just 8 episodes, which is already quite suspicious. And I honestly went into it with very low expectations. Not normal low, I mean, yeah, I've seen what you people have done before low. I've watched the spin-offs, I've seen the international versions, I've experienced things I didn't really need to experience, so in reality I expected nothing. And somehow, that still wasn't low enough, because I've now watched it 4 times, which is not something I do unless I'm either very impressed or very unemployed. And now I'm in an awkward position I genuinely didn't plan for. I think this might actually be the best international version of The Office, which feels wrong to say, but also correct. And I don't really like that combination. Let me explain. Now, to understand why this works, you first have to understand why it really shouldn't. Because when you think of Mexican television, your brain immediately goes somewhere very specific. Telenovelas, dramatic zoom-ins that last longer than the actual plot, people reacting like they just found out they've been adopted, again, Chavo del Ocho, and of course, so naturally, you expect the Mexican version of The Office to lean heavy into that. And I mean, it does, but for those stereotypes. Because instead of taking them seriously, it actually makes fun of them, constantly, aggressively, with zero respect. The kind of disrespect that feels earned. Like the show itself grew up watching all of this and just decided, yeah, no, we're not doing that again. And that's exactly why it works. Because the show isn't trying to represent Mexican culture, it's actually roasting it from the inside, which is the only way this kind of humor actually functions. Because if you try to do this from the outside, it just feels offensive. And when it comes from within, it feels like therapy. Slightly aggressive therapy, but therapy nonetheless. And that's what the American version did. It took normal situations and made them slightly worse in a way that felt uncomfortably accurate. It didn't feel like a show, it felt like an actual documentation. Like someone just accidentally left a camera running in the worst office imaginable and then decided to monetize it. And Oficina does this exact same thing. The stereotypes are there, but they're not the joke. They're just the starting point. The random salesman bumping and grinding outside a supermarket, of course he's here. You may think that having a mariachi in the office is totally fake. Trust me, it isn't. That's just a random Tuesday in March, probably before lunch as well. And the scary part is that no one questions it. That's just part of the regular Latin American office. And that's the reason it works. Because if you lived in Mexico, Ecuador, or honestly, anywhere in Latin America, nothing here feels fake. It just feels slightly edited. Like someone went into real life, removed 10% of the chaos and said, yep, this is not believable, which is exactly what The Office has always been. Some people say it leans too much into stereotypes. I think it doesn't go far enough, because the show at its best is when it fully commits to how ridiculous everything is. When it stops pretending and just accepts that reality here is already doing most of the writing. That's where the humor is. That's where the relatability is. That's where it stops being a remake and starts being accurate. And somehow, it also has that same rewatchability. I mean, it is only 8 episodes, but it has that dangerous, just one more episode effect that turns into 3 hours of your life disappearing for no reason. And then suddenly it's 2 a.m. and you're questioning your decisions, but not enough to stop watching. Which is honestly the most relatable way to measure something is actually The Office level good. Now, the second thing we have to consider why this show actually works, honestly, is the characters. Okay, if we talk about the characters, it's important to remember The Office, because this is where every Office remake usually dies immediately. The American version didn't just have good characters, it had stupidly good characters. Michael Scott is on the Mount Rushmore of TV whether we like it or not. Dwight is a socially accepted threat. Jim is a king. Pam is there, and somehow all of them together created a workplace that felt both believable and legally questionable. You could click on a random episode, any random scene, and within 10 seconds you'd understand why it worked. It wasn't just writing. It felt like surveillance footage of a very dysfunctional building. And that's exactly what most remakes don't understand. They think the solution is to copy. Same personalities, same dynamics, same structures, just in another language. Which is a terrible idea. You cannot translate Michael Scott. You cannot Control-C Dwight Schrute into another country and expect him to function. I mean, he barely functions in Scranton. And this is where La Oficina somehow manages to both understand this and ignore it at the same time. Because when it stops copying, it's great, but but when it copies, it can get painful. And now, yes, I mean, every original character has their Mexican version here. Jero is Michael, Memo is Jim, Sophie is Pam, Aniv is Dwight. It's basically a group project where everyone copied the same homework but changed the font, but the difference is how seriously they commit to it. Perfect example is Jero. Jero works. Jero actually works really well. Not because he is Michael Scott, but because he very clearly isn't. He feels like someone who watched Michael Scott once, misunderstood the lesson, and then built an entire personality around the misunderstanding. He's inspired by Michael, sure, but they're completely different people. Michael Scott is a good-hearted salesman who somehow failed upwards into management, if that's even possible. He's desperate for approval. He wants to be liked like a basic human need, and everything he does comes from this weird mix of insecurity and optimism. He's not supposed to be in charge. He kind of just ended up there. Jero, on the other hand, is a nepo babe, which immediately explains everything. The lack of social awareness, the confidence, the decisions that make absolutely no sense but also have zero consequences. Despite this difference, they both absolutely love their team. They genuinely care about their people. They want them to be happy. They want to be part of the group. They just have absolutely no idea how to behave like normal human beings while doing it. And I mean, that's where the comedy comes from. Because Michael is awkward because he's trying too hard. Jero is awkward because he's never had to try at all. Michael walks into a room hoping people like him. Jero walks into a room assuming they already do. And somehow both are wrong. Now, for me, the problem with the characters of La Oficina is Memo, Sophie, and Aniv. Because this is where the show gets scared and just copies Homer. Memo isn't inspired by Jim. He is Jim. But like, translated with a beard and Mexican, which somehow makes him feel less real. Like every time he looks at the camera, you can hear a checklist going, okay, this is the Jim moment, check, we got it. Sophie has that exact same issue. She doesn't feel like a person. She feels like Pam on exchange student mode, just trying not to mess up the original formula. And Aniv? Aniv suffers the most, because Dwight is not a character you can recreate. Dwight is a very specific problem, and Aniv feels like someone trying too hard to act weird instead of just being weird, which turns him into that one coworker who thinks they're quirky, but is actually just exhausting. And that's where my issue lies. This part of the show, it's too safe, feels copied. And in a show like The Office, being safe is basically the worst thing you can be. Because now, instead of creating something new, you're just constantly reminding people of something better. I mean, you can't just give Hitler a sombrero and expect him to be a new person. That's still Hitler. Weird example, but accurate. Now, moving from negative to positive, where the show actually becomes great is the secondary character, because these feel real. Not what if Stanley was Mexican, but what if this very specific person exists and somehow has a job? That's a difference. Lucio is a creepy lawyer with absolutely no boundaries and even less shame. Mina has those camera looks that feel like she's judging your life choices. And Giancarlo is insane. The whole I went to conversion therapy and now I'm cured while acting exactly the same is one of the funniest things in the show because it's so uncomfortable it loops back into being genius. And the reason they work is simple. Every office has those people. The creepy one, the confusing one, the one who knows too much. These characters don't feel written. They feel unfortunately real. And then there's Mondra. Going from positive, now to negative. Mondra is supposed to be Toby, which is already unfair because you cannot recreate Toby. Toby is not a character. Toby is a workplace condition. Mondra doesn't feel like that. He feels too aware. Toby works because he exists quietly and gets hated for no reason. Mondra feels like he understands everything, and instead of suffering through it, he reacts to it. And that ruins the charm, because instead of feeling like part of the office, it feels like he's above it, like he's judging it, like he's judging you. And that doesn't work here, because in the office, everyone has to be part of the problem. Mondra feels like he's just watching the show. And hey, that's my job. Hey, and if you like Dwight or Michael or Jero, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Now the real question is, where does the show go from? Because making one good season is quite impressive, to be honest. Not destroying it immediately after is where most of these remakes collapse like a cheap office chair. And the answer isn't to get closer to The Office. It's actually the opposite. It needs to become its own office. The show has just been renewed for a second season on Amazon, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure they were surprised by how good it did. There were so many positive reviews, so many positive comments on the show, so Amazon is really going forward with it, which is good, in my opinion. But we gotta look into why the show worked and what they can do moving forward. Because the show, it's at its best when it's its own thing. Not when it's referencing the American version. Not when it's copying dynamics. But when it leans fully into being unapologetically Latin American. That's where it stops feeling like a remake and starts feeling like something that actually deserves to exist. And the thing is, it already has the formula. It just needs to commit to it harder. Because what made The Office work wasn't the character specifically. It was the tone. The dry humor, the awkward silences, the looks at the camera that feel like silent cries for help, the jokes that are just uncomfortable enough that you're not sure if you should laugh or report it to HR. And Oficina has all that, but now it needs to make it its own. Give me more mariachis in places they absolutely should not be. Give me more hyper-specific Latin American references that half the world won't understand, and that's perfectly fine. Give me jokes that feel like they could get someone fired, cancelled, or at the very least get sent to HR for a very uncomfortable meeting that ends up nowhere. Because that's real. That's the point. The more specific it gets, the more relatable it becomes. Not just for Mexico, but for all of Latin America. Because the chaos is shared. The awkward work environments, the weird office hierarchy, the random nonsense that somehow becomes normal after 2 weeks. That's universal here. And that's the advantage this show has that the American version never needed. It doesn't have to be safe. It just has to be accurate. So no more playing it safe with these main characters. No more trying to recreate what already worked somewhere else. Lean into what worked here. Make it messier. Make it more uncomfortable. Make it more specific. Basically make it worse. Because that's exactly when it becomes better. And that's what makes this whole situation deeply annoying. Because I started this fully prepared to explain why this shouldn't exist. Why it was just another remake doing cultural cosplay with a Microsoft Office license. And instead I ended up here, defending it? Not because it's perfect, because it's not. It still has those moments where you can feel it panicking and reaching for the Office like a safety blanket. But because when it stops doing that, when it fully leans into its own chaos, it becomes something way more interesting than a remake. It becomes familiar in a very uncomfortable way. Not, haha, I've seen this before on TV, but I'm pretty sure I work with a person exactly like this and they still owe me money. And that's the difference. That's why it works here and not in most other places. Because this version doesn't just translate the humor. It understands the environment, the awkward hierarchies, the weird professionalism, the borderline inappropriate comments that somehow don't get anyone fired but definitely get discussed in group chats later. That's not something you adapt. That's something you recognize. And when the show trusts that, when it stops trying to prove it can be The Office and just exists as La Oficina, that's when it actually becomes dangerous. In a good way though, because now it has its own identity, its own voice, its own very specific kind of dysfunction that doesn't need to be compared to anything else. So if it wants to keep working, it just has to do one thing. Stop looking up and start looking around. Be more local, more specific, more uncomfortable, but more honest. Lean harder into the jokes that feel like they shouldn't have made it past editing. Let the characters be worse, not better. Because that's the irony. The show improves the less it tries to behave. And if it fully commits to that, then yeah, we might be stuck with the first international version of The Office that just didn't survive, but actually deserved to excel, which is great. And I think I'm still processing that. Well, hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. And if you haven't seen La Oficina, I highly recommend it. Especially if you speak Spanish, man, you'll enjoy it. So please don't forget to subscribe, like, leave a comment. I promise I'm going to be making more videos, more and more. I have more in the chamber. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great day and see you soon. Bye guys.